Now let's look at the works of Pieter Bruegel, who was active in the 1550s and especially in the 1560s. You'll notice that his name is Pieter Bruegel the Elder. He had sons. One of them was Pieter Bruegel the Younger. And several of his sons became painters, and their sons became painters. One of his sons, Jan Bruegel, became very famous, in his own right, but also as a flower painter, and he was hired by Peter Paul Rubens to paint his flowers. They called him Flower Bruegel. So it's a whole family of painters, and Pieter Bruegel the Elder is, for this time period, the most famous one. So on your exam, you can just call him Bruegel. I'll know which one you mean. He also lives in Antwerp. You'll remember that in the 15th century, Bruges was such an important city. Bruges rebelled against Maximilian of Austria. After the death of Mary of Burgundy, the new duke was her very young child, Philip the Fair or Philip the Handsome, and his father was Maximilian, the Duke of Austria, later to become the Holy Roman Emperor. And he thought that that meant that he should be ruling the Netherlands. But not all the people of the Netherlands agreed. They thought that there should be a regent's council. They didn't want a foreign ruler coming in and setting himself up as their ruler. And so there was rebellion. Several of Maximilian's counselors were executed, including Jan van Navenhoven, who was Martin's older brother. And this did not dispose Maximilian to them. So what he did was change the trade center. He took away the trade from Bruges and moved it to Antwerp, which may have been a financial disaster for Bruges. In the long term, what happened was Bruges remained pretty much a medieval city. So people now, as tourists, go and flock to Bruges and see this wonderful medieval city. Antwerp, of course, has become a very modern city with only a very small section retaining some of the medieval character. So I guess it's better for the tourist industry if they took the trade in the late 15th into the early 16th century elsewhere. So Antwerp becomes the center for commerce and art in Flanders in the 16th century. Now, Pieter Bruegel the Elder was a very prolific painter, and he created a lot of different types of pictures. He also created prints, or at least designed them, and some of these were religious pictures with religious subjects. Some of them could be called Boschkian allegories. He used the idea of the hybrid devils and sort of monstrous creatures in certain images allegorically. And then he's also very famous for his peasant scenes. Bruegel also painted proverb pictures, pictures in which the Netherlandish proverbs, and the people of the lowlands just love these proverbs. They are depicted literally in the picture. There's one in Berlin that has around 100 different proverbs shown. And those are so fun because what you do is you go in and you try to figure out which proverb is being used. For example, the big fish eats a little fish. The world turned upside down. We would say pie in the sky. They would say pie on the roof. A lot of things like that. But what we're going to look at is one of his landscapes. Now, you notice I wrote landscapes with human figures because this is still the Renaissance. This is still the 16th century. And you generally do not have, there are a few and very, very few exceptions, where you have landscapes just showing the scene with no human beings. Usually in the 16th century, if you had a landscape, it might have some scenes, like it might be the rest on the flight into Egypt and have a little picture of Mary and the baby Jesus resting on their way to Egypt. Or it might be the temptation of Saint Anthony, and there a small image would show, the saint, or one of the saints who's got out from the wilderness, the Saint Jerome, and you have a big landscape and say the small figure. Well, Bruegel doesn't quite do that. That's something like Pottenmeer, or there's another man named Henri Mettenbletz, who we're not showing in class, in the survey class. But Bruegel will show you landscapes that have human figures in them, but they aren't a particular subject from religious or classical works of art. Now, in some cases, they might illustrate a proverb, but what we're looking at is just a landscape that has human figures in it. This one goes under several names. It's often called Hunters in the Snow. Your book was calling it The Return of the Hunters. And as you can see, it is a wintry landscape, and it's supposed to give you the feeling of being, extremely cold. We believe that it comes from a series where you have all 4 of the 4 seasons. However, they don't all survive. We have summer, we have fall. We don't have one for spring, but presumably one either was or was intended to be created. As I say, we don't have that. Now, you'll notice that we do have human figures. Some of them are in the distance, a few of them are in the foreground, but they're anonymous human figures. This isn't the Duke going out to hunt, or some classical story or some biblical story. These are just people, ordinary people, everyday people, going about their business at work and play, as it were, in this very wintry landscape. So we certainly see the season of the year. Now, where does this idea come from? It is derived, in a sense, from a long history of images of the labors of the month. You used to see the labors of the month carved on cathedrals or churches. And they would have, the activity, reaping, sowing, killing the hog for winter, so they can salt the meat. And that actually is going on there. I'll point it out to you in a minute. And these were showing, time is passing. They often were in conjunction with the zodiac. We actually saw something very similar. We saw a calendar page in the Trévisures of the Book of Hours of the Duc de Berry. And here is our winter scene with a zodiac up above, and showing the day, or rather showing the month of the year, February, and it's very cold there. Rather than every month, Bruegel is showing us presumably the season of winter. But when it was in the Book of Hours, or when it was carved on a church, these labors of the month were referring to what? Religious things. The calendar page would be opposite a list of saints' days. But with Bruegel, showing you this wintry landscape is secular. Secular is not religious. It's the opposite of a religious picture. I want to point out that we always talk about Netherlandish naturalism. Here, the individual forms may not be extremely detailed like Jan van Eyck, but you do have the idea of detail of all of these different activities going on. And you might notice how this is laid out. You have in the foreground, it almost seems like a cliff, this sort of triangular form where we're seeing the foreground. We're seeing these anonymous men trudging out with their they're hunting dogs who are going to go hunting, since so they sometimes call it hunters in the snow, or return of the hunters. Maybe they're coming back from hunting, perhaps. At any rate, you see right behind them some people working with this fire, and what they are doing is singeing the bristles off a newly slaughtered hog, which was something that was usually done in November or December, depending on your weather, because further north they might do it earlier, further south they might do it later. At any rate, this is sort of a detail of activities. And then when you look into the far distance, you see all of these details once again of everyday activity. There are people going skating on the frozen lake. You can see here that there's a house that has a chimney fire in it. And people are climbing up ladders and they're trying to fight the fire. See that in the distance there beyond the church. So the kind of details we have are very different than the detailed naturalism of Jan van Eyck, but they are details of everyday activity. Now, something else you had to have noticed was you had that close distance, and then this look far, far into the distance. And far in the distance, we have these very craggy mountains. Someone has called these highlands in the lowlands. Where would you ever see mountains like that in the Netherlands? You wouldn't. It's flat there. It is literally the lowlands. There are some hills when you get near Liège, when you're getting near Germany, but there's nothing like this. Those are the Alps. And Bruegel knew about the Alps because he had gone down through the Alps to Italy and as far south as Naples. He has a painting of the Bay of Naples. So he actually does Seascape as well. And so as we look at this, you'll notice the great distance and how he sets this up. He has the foreground almost like it's on a cliff, which once again there couldn't be in the Netherlands. And then you see a vast panorama. And you get a sense of being led back into space by these trees. As you see, they're getting smaller and smaller, thinner and tinier, and sort of leading us back on the diagonal into the picture. To give us the sense of distance, you have not only the tiny people, and you'll notice the bird flying across the horizon. And he's about half as big as the mountain, a lot bigger than the people, so we know he's closer to us. There's another bird sitting on a branch, other birds sitting on branches. And I thought I would also show you the harvesters. This is thought to be another one of these seasons of the year showing the harvest time, which would take place in August or September. And as you can see, they've been harvesting the wheat, and it's a hot day. It's a hot day, like it sometimes gets very, very hot in August. And they're taking a break. Some of them have brought their lunch. They're eating. One guy's taking a snooze, a midday rest. Other people are coming in from the fields. And once again, you see this vast vista looking across the fields onto the distant landscape and even the sea. And so here you see that detail. And when you look at the detail, you'll notice once again, you see all of these tiny little people, small houses, and even the tiny ships in the water, in the sea beyond. And here, of course, are some of the details in the foregrounds, the details of the peasants at work. Now, we do have a term for this. It's genre. Genre just means type or kind, but we've taken it to mean this particular type of art showing everyday activities. So Pieter Bruegel, is very innovative in showing us these landscapes, but they're imaginary landscapes. He didn't see a place that had the Alps in the lowlands. So at this point, they're not trying to record exactly what the artist saw, but amalgamating and putting things together to give you a wonderful vista. Now, sometimes they might show an actual place. We have a few examples of that, in fact, as early as the 15th century in Germany. And as I mentioned, Bruegel does, when he's painting the Bay of Naples, show you something as topographic. It's the shape that looks like the Bay of Naples. But here we have that combination of the landscape and the life of the peasants, as it were.